So how's everyone doing? Had a good weekend?
Doing well.
Uh,
It's a nice 4-day weekend.
did it rain enough for you?
It's very
Uh,
nice sun.
Today
Yeah,
is nice.
the sun, yeah, came out today. That's nice. Um, cool. Well, I will just roll through the agenda, and if you guys have anything to add, just let me know. I don't think we have any new folks on the call, so everyone knows each other, which is cool. Um, and then project update. I'm gonna roll through the updates there on the change log, at least most of them, but feel free to stop me and ask questions. Um, so the first update is adding bulk endpoints for both the search and data ports. Finish that. So we've got bulk, add, update, delete endpoints for the data port, and working and tested and validated on both PouchDB and CouchDB, which is cool. Did a live stream last week on going through adding that, and posted those videos on YouTube. And I think that live stream kind of shows you each piece of the architecture. So maybe worth checking out for folks wanting to contribute. And then with search, you can add bulk documents to your index. So you can take a list of JSON documents and post them to underscore bulk, and they will add to your index, and they're idempotent. So if you've already added them, they'll just do nothing. So that's probably the biggest thing. The other thing was creating a GitHub repo called Tour, which really kind of is a quick 10, 20-minute kind of immersive tour through the Hyper API. Not super expansive, but just, here is some of the key methods of hyper63, and here's how you can kind of go through them using the playground site. You kind of stick your email in there and you get a JWT, and then you can go through the tour step by step. Also created a video screencast for that, and did a kind of promo for OS 101, the conference coming out, Open Source 101, at the end of March, and did like a 2 or 3 minute kind of demo to Todd Lewis on that, and that was pretty cool. And it's pretty cool. Todd totally gets it, super excited about hyper63, understands the problem it's going to solve, and said great job on the website and the blog and all of that. So that was pretty cool. That's good feedback. And then the other thing that I spent the last few days on is what I'm calling the micro stack. So lately we've been working with what I call the nano stack, and the nano stack is really something to run on a single computer, or kind of like a single process, and it uses PouchDB, kind of the file system for storage, and memory for cache, and this library mini search, which is memory for search. And then the micro stack is more, kind of a step up from Nano, that's kind of built to run in a small cloud, right? So the micro stack would be separate servers, if you will, for each service. So in that stack, we have CouchDB as the adapter for the database, Redis as the adapter for the cache, MinIO as the adapter for storage, which is a really cool project. It basically uses the same API as S3, but allows you to run as like a server or a cluster, et cetera, on any cloud. So that's pretty cool, worth checking out. And then Elasticsearch for search. And in the repo, I created a micro folder in the images folder that really provides a Docker compose, so you can, pull the project down and run Docker compose on that, and it would spin up Docker containers of all of those services, and then spin up a hyper63 that connects to those services. So you can kind of see how you can, run that micro stack on your local computer if you wanted to. And then the other thing that I just finished, and I'll post in the Slack, is there's a service, render.com, that is like a platform as a service, but it's built on Kubernetes. So it has all of the nice stuff that Kubernetes has. But sorry, my dog is driving me crazy. Do you need to go outside? Hang on. Sorry about that. He wouldn't leave me alone. I'm like, I think he needed to go outside. But so what I was saying is the render.com is a platform as a service built on Kubernetes. So it has all the same semantics as Kubernetes, but it's you give it a simple YAML file and it deploys for you. I'll post that in the chat, because you might want to take a look at it. But basically, what I did was set up a deployment script for render. So, if you had a render account, you could just, really click a button and launch hyper63 on render.com under your account. Now it does set up all the servers as if you were going to run them in Kubernetes. So it won't be well, free. Let me see where it went. Maybe I didn't push it. Anyway, I'll push it if I haven't. That's why. Here we go. I'll paste it in the chat here. So basically, it just gives you an example of how you would set up these services and connect to them with hyper63 using the configuration. One of the cool bits is, let's see if I can show the config file. Is the config file is using ESM, so that was pretty cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. You can see the adapters and the plugins and the middleware, and it's all like the screenshot I took a few weeks ago. So that's pretty cool. And let's see. I think all that's the updates. So refactored the Redis, MinIO, Elasticsearch, and Couch. And actually, Tyler did the Elasticsearch adapter, which was super cool. So all those are kind of in this new packages architecture and working. So those are the updates. And the shout outs, again, want to thank Ben and Janita for doing the tour and verifying that the tour kind of experience worked. And Casey for commenting on the security discussion, which we'll talk about. Joe Dukes for helping organize a Jairus Code School alumni demo. And then Tyler for contributing to the core project and really, working on refactoring the Elasticsearch package to work with the new ports. So thank you all. And then one little thing on that is we've got a blog set up. So if anyone wants to guest post on the blog, happy to allow you to be a guest post person. And it doesn't have to be about Hyper. It could be just about, apps, front end stuff, APIs, anything that we want to talk about. But that's open. So if anyone would like to do that, or if would like for me to cross post their post, that'll be pretty cool. One of the things I'm going to do with the blog is to set up a cross post so that when an article is posted to the blog, it'll automatically go to Medium, Dev2, and Substack. So it'll, I want to keep the source of truth, the blog, but then want to also, get an audience too. So I've got the Medium and Substack set up. I've just got to set up the Dev2, and I think I'll have that in a couple, have that going by this meeting next time. This is kind of the road to a release. Still targeting end of March to have a release, but most of the things that we'll choose from here on out will be focused at getting a viable release. And I think the core is pretty much there. And there's two main RFCs to discuss today. And I think depending on what we decide there, that's going to really kind of frame the release, if you will, for Hyper. The rest will be kind of documentation and guides and stuff like that. So with that said, before we jump into the discussion, is there any feedback, comments, or questions about the updates and shout outs?
I mean, it seems like you're rocking and rolling. I'm pretty far behind on catching up on stuff, but just like every time I look around, you're like pumping out content. It's great.
Well, I'm trying to be a force multiplier. So if I'm working on one thing, I'm trying to, record it, make sure I put it out there, and, try to make a post out of it, share it on LinkedIn, etc. So hopefully that's showing.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Cool.
Also, have you been getting questions about asyncs, the async ADT?
Not many questions. Tyler kind of picked it up. One of the things that I ran into was, it's not necessarily yet ESM friendly on some stuff, but all in all, it's been working fine.
Cool. Yeah, I think probably at some point like when, I don't know when, but at some point when I've got time, I've been meaning to write a post on async anyway. So doing it and like using references in the project
Yeah.
could be something that could work out. And then you can also, anytime someone's like, hey, how do I work with this? You can be like, boom, blog post.
Exactly.
don't have to, repeat this.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome. Yeah, I'm working on a post with the API, but definitely want to continue to to talk about, you know, ADTs, especially async, and really have been using a lot of reader async um, to essentially inject the services as a reader and then ask for them when you need them through the pipeline. And that's been working really, really well. Um, it makes things so much easier to manage. But I know that's a big mind mind blown kind of thing.
Where do you have that housed? Is that your own implementation, or are you using something?
On what?
Just the abstract or the ADTs that you guys are using?
Yeah, right now we're using Crocs, but it's all just vanilla ADTs. So I'm just using Crocs just because the errors are clear.
Why did you implement the either out of curiosity in particular?
So I implemented the either and the async or task mainly for Dino, and I built a version of Hyper on Dino, and at the time I couldn't get Crocs to port to Dino, so I built my own. Um, but as of I think a few days ago or whatever, Skypack did a release where they actually improved their compatibility with Node. And it really is kind of the Node compatibility thing, I think, without digging too deep into it. So if, and I actually got Crocs to run on Dino, which was pretty cool. So, again, the only other reason that I wrote the either and task, and I wrote this validation toolkit on Dino because I want to maybe build a validation library, right? Um, build one that that could be first class in hyper63. Zod is pretty good, but having having an ADT validation library that uses fold map can give us a lot of flexibility, as well as a lot of kind of features that we can add and extend in a clean way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I remember your post a few days ago about being able to use Crocs for the first time, but it did not connect that was why you created your own. I thought that you just preferred your own for some reason. Thought you had a preference for your own. A good recommendation also, by the way, for Robert and Tyler. Although I did just end up implementing my own because it was quicker at the time.
Yeah, I mean, they all, for the most part, most of these ADT libraries are all going to obey the same sort of laws. Um, but these asyncs also have a timeout as well. There's a timeout function. And like how you interact with it is probably slightly different from
Yeah,
implementation
and
to
one of the
implementation.
things that I'm doing, because Fluture has a lot of great stuff, but I'm using Vercel's fetch retry and wrapping fetch around fetch retry and then wrapping that in a sync. So I get a lot of a lot of good things from that API. So the fetch has the retries in it, but then the wrapping around the sync from Promise with the timeouts is kind of nice.
Yeah.
But
And again, you could implement your own retries with async, but
you
I
can.
mean, like, why recreate, why reinvent? Like, you've already got it. So,
Yeah.
that's fair.
Yeah. I mean, it's only like, if you go and look at the code for the fetch retry, it's only like 5 lines of code, but it's like, they did it, and it's just, if it comes to a point to do it, then do it. But yeah, I really like, I mean, so Sanctuary is cool, but it's, you know, again, I don't know enough to know what I'm saying, but what I feel is, Crocs is very, you know, JavaScripty and kind of paired with Ramda, and it's kind of meant to work with Ramda really well. Sanctuary seems to be more Haskell-y, right? And very kind of focused in that way. But again, I think it just, they all work, and they're all kind of the same.
You're only saying that because we have a contributor to Crocs and an author of a Ramda book here.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, Robert
yeah,
introduced me to Crocs, so I can't. Kudos.
yeah. And I will say, like, if any of these things, like if you were only, I'm not gonna say just, like maybe just, if you were only, going into this one thing and doing, lifting into this higher state to do one thing and then coming right back out of it, like, I'd say there's no point. Like, just do the thing and do it safe. Um, like why lift stuff into a maybe or an either and then just bring it right back out. But it's if you're able to like lift stuff up into this higher safe level and do what you want all around, only extracting stuff when you need to, that's where I think the value comes out. But it seems like the asyncs are working out.
Yeah, they're working really well. The you get extensibility by default, and that extensibility to, like in the live stream, adding the bulk endpoint, right? Um, it's not, so PouchDB has a bulk endpoint. So you're like, okay, well, I'll just take these JSON documents and add it to that, call that bulk endpoint, and be done. But it's not that simple. Those JSON documents have IDs. PouchDB is looking for underscore IDs. PouchDB won't do an update without a rev, right? Those documents don't have revs. So you had to kind of create this pipeline where you're transforming the data, and you're also making async calls to the database to say, like, give me all the revision properties for these IDs, and then creating your doc collection based on, is this an add, is this an update, is this a delete kind of thing, and then call the bulk update. And so, just being able to turn everything into Legos and just work and say, okay, I need to get this step right. Boom. Then this step, boom, then this step. And you just work through that pipeline. And then at the end, it's done. But the biggest win is, in my opinion, is testing. It just makes testing really, you validate your input, you process your pipeline, and your output's either going to be an error or success, right? So your test is, in my opinion, clear and concise.
Nice.
Yeah. But it really, and time, right? So I was able to implement that pipeline feature with happy and sad tests and everything over 4 live streams. So basically 4 hours worth of actual work. And having that abstraction just removes so much boilerplate to where it's just, you're focusing on, the business value, right? You're focusing on the problem, not trying to set up something to get to the problem. um, so big thumbs up with a sync for me.
Cool, cool.
Um,
Where to next?
yep. So RFCs. The first one is security, and basically, I'm really going back and forth a lot on this, but basically, Casey brought up a good point last meeting about adding security in some fashion to the project, and so one of the initial proposals after that was like adding scopes, and so the way that the first, let me kind of back up and say the way that the project is now is that you can choose what kind of app you want to run, and that app is the interface. So that app could be Express, that app could be gRPC, it could be protobuffers, it could be GraphQL. All of those things are true. And then there's this middleware piece that will essentially act like a pipeline. So before, and it depends on this app implementing this middleware, right? So this app has basically, the app, when you execute it, it returns a app, and the middleware gets injected into the app. So that app has to do something with that middleware. But the middleware pattern is just, I'm going to take an argument as an app, and I'm going to return an app. So the middleware pipeline is, I take an app and I return an app. And in this case, we're using it to secure this service by JWT using a secret. But it could be a public-private key. It could be OAuth 2. It could be whatever you choose to use. So it could be completely pass through because your infrastructure is creating the security boundaries, right? So like in Google, you can just load stuff in a pod, and then you can just say secure this endpoint, right? And Google will do that. Or you could use a tool like a security gateway like Kong or Express Gateway and secure the endpoints that way. So this kind of leaves everything open. And what Casey was saying was that that's great for big enterprise projects, but maybe um, maybe for small startups having something regarding best practices. So one of the things that I thought of was scopes, and basically putting scopes on the core so that regardless of the app or the client, in order to, let's say, read data from the data service, you have to present the core as scope. You have to get it a scope, let's say data colon read, right? If you wanted to write data, it would be data colon write. And that's so that would change the surface area of the core and basically say that, you know, the app would be responsible for passing the scope to the client. And I tried to draw this out, or the scope to core. So the app would be responsible for passing the scope to core. And I tried to draw this out in a sequence diagram. Hopefully it makes sense. And this is where I'm struggling, is when, you know, when you're dealing with services, you have a different authentication scheme than what your client deals with an API, right? So if you are connecting to Twilio in your app, you would register with Twilio and you would get an API key. And then your app would be able to do everything that that API key could do on Twilio. So I'm kind of following that kind of practice versus making the service too complicated where the API has to think a lot. Like it's like, and the reason is because the API should be really kind of being the router, if you will, the who can go where when, right? Because it knows who the client is and what the client is authorized to do. So as I drew this out, you know, it's like the client goes to the Auth server, they get some sort of valid thing, and then they request get movies. The API validates that token, and then it posts that token to, if I were to implement what I've proposed, the API would have to post a request to Hyper to get a token. And then Hyper would validate that token, and then it would return a JWT. Then the API would have to use that JWT to do a request to Hyper to get the movies. And then it would validate that token, check the scope, return the movies. Then the API would return the movies to the client. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
What I struggle with is this extra hop for every single request. I don't like it. And then you have to sit there and say, well, what are you going to pass as the API to get that token? So you got to pass something. So the alternate proposal is kind of this is maybe instead of creating a token endpoint is to say, you know, API person, you can either, you know, have a private key and then put a public key on hyper63. And then you generate your token and then you make a post. Or you could do a shared secret, generate your token, make a post. But still, API are the client, right? The hyper63 client kind of generates the token instead of making a separate call to hyper63 to generate the token. And to me, this is a little bit more cleaner.
Are there any downsides of this one in particular that you can think of? Like, what's the trade-off?
So the trade-off is, you know, the API has to maintain some sort of thing that it knows about, right? And even either one of these, it has to do it. The trade-off is that it's just one less hop. And I think this could be implemented in the client, the hyper63 client. So like the API caller, the API developer wouldn't even have to know about the private key, right? It's just actually just gets generated at init time for the hyper63 client. And then it passes the public key during that init to hyper63, maybe. I don't know. There would have to be some kind of step where you create a private key and a public key, and you give hyper the public key, and you keep the private key secret.
Hey, sorry, I joined late.
No worries.
This looks really cool, but I'm missing a lot of context, so I don't
Yeah.
think I could provide much.
Yeah, well, I think the first question is in the proposal was kind of focused on, let's get to it, adding scopes for essentially each endpoint. So in core, basically, if you request to write a file to storage, if your request doesn't include this scope, then it's not going to work. So that's kind of the first thing. Does everybody feel like that is needed?
I think it's I think it's good that if we're going to use tokens to kind of constrain access, that we don't want like a token being hijacked to be able to use on any hyper63 port. Like for example, if I get a data, or if I get like a search token and I could start mucking around in data and like deleting data or mutating it, that sounds kind of not good. So these scopes, just at a very high level, makes sense to me, or even just scopes at the port level.
Yeah.
Or maybe like read and write at an even higher level. It's just purely read, purely write across all ports. I can see that as well. But these make sense.
Yeah, I think the biggest one that we have to definitely address is the destroy, because it's super easy right now to like destroy a database or destroy your search by mistake. So I was thinking that, kind of read, write, and destroy for each port. And
yeah, a distinction between write and destroy seems like a good idea to me. I don't know how conventional that is. I would defer to other folks on the call that have a bit more experience with scope claims on like a JWT.
yeah, well, within healthcare, they basically created their own convention and just documented it and put a fancy standard label on front of it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the scopes can be whatever you want them to be, but yeah. Write, read, and destroy sounds reasonable. Sounds kosher to me.
Anyone, reject the idea of scopes?
That was pretty standard for stuff. Like, I mean, you can see this on GitHub for generating a token, for example. I've seen it a bunch of places and it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And then the second question is more of kind of the flow of you know, kind of generating that token. I like the idea of hiding it inside the client, if you will, the hyper63 client. So in the hyper63 client, let me pull that up. Basically, the way, you know, you could use the REST API, but you know, you have to kind of build your own client essentially. So what we're working on is, you know, and envision a client for every single, you know, kind of platform. We may not build all of those, but definitely the node client. And then in this client, you can create the client and pass some arguments. And in this situation, it could be like, you know, pass a private key, or a secret or something like that. But then when you call client data create, this client will inject the right scope for you. So you wouldn't have to inject the scope, right? So as someone building their API, they get that security by default.
And so the client would, you pass your secret to the client, and the client would generate a JWT, and it would sign it with that secret. And so there's no round trip to hyper63 to get like an access token or anything. It's just signed with your private key and then validated on hyper63.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry if you guys already went over this.
No, we just started, so that's exactly correct. And instead of this like round trip every time, because
okay, yeah.
if we do this round trip every time, then something's got to validate this post, right? So you need another layer to validate the post.
Yeah, it's just like turtles all the way down.
Yeah.
At some point, you have to have some sort of like notion of an API key or some sort of secret. And of course, with if you have that token endpoint, it is sort of a single point of failure. Whereas if you have, and it's just latency, it's just more sort of propagation delay and waiting on things to come back. It's not something you can cache.
Right.
So just signing a JW2 with a secret makes sense to me. Would it be, would you sign it? Sorry, I'm like looking at so you have used the hyper63 private key, and then you validate the token on the hyper63 track with the public key.
Right. And actually this would be the API would actually own the private key, right? So like it just wouldn't be, yeah. So the API would own the private key, and Hyper would only know of the public key. So Hyper would never know what the private key was, and the API would, you know its private key.
Interesting. So this could give the ability of the consumer of hyper63 to rotate its own keys.
Right.
For whatever use case. Maybe one company, they rotate their keys once a month or something because they're lazy. And then another company, they have hypersensitive data, pun unintended.
Yeah.
And so they have to rotate their keys every hour and they could
Right.
just have an endpoint on hyper63. Hey, here's my new public key, matches my new private key.
Right. I really like the way that this project CDS Hooks does it, but basically in the auth server, you have an endpoint that allows you, sorry, allows you to get your get the public key. So basically, and auth 0 does this too, I think. Yeah, auth 0 does it too. So basically, hyper63 would come in and cache, but would go hyper63 to auth get public key. And with that step, you would write your own middleware, or we could have a middleware that implements an example like this. But with that step, that's how you would do key rotation. So this auth service would provide your key rotation, and every time a private key came, there would be in the header of the JWT, there would be a KID, and that KID would be what hyper63 would use to get the public key, and then it would verify it, validate it.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I think it also, from like a developer perspective, typically with sort of open source solutions, things that I've seen at least, there's like you can spin up just like a sandbox with no sort of auth, and then you can turn off on later. Like, so you can just play in the sandbox. This Firebase has this. You just turn on Firebase with wide open rules, and then you can lock it down later once you're done playing. And this sort of allows for that because you can spin up hyper63 with no sort of public key. And it's like, okay, I'm wide open. And then when you give it a public key, it will lock things down. I guess this one question that comes to mind is, when I spin up hyper63, can I pass my public key to it as like a startup argument? Or am I going to have to post to hyper63 on startup?
No, you could you could include your public key as an environment variable or as a secret file. So then when Hyper starts up, it's got it. Essentially, you've got access to the middleware. So in this case, I'm grabbing a secret here, but this could be a public key. Yeah, so the answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could, as part of that middleware in hyper63 or whatever, maybe it's not middleware at this point if it does this, like on startup, it fetches the public ID from your authorization server, and it doesn't on hyper63's like health check endpoint or something, it doesn't come up as healthy until it's received that key or something like that. And then that way there's no downtime if you're orchestrating it with something like Kubernetes. And you just wait for the health check endpoint. Like, I'm not healthy until I grab this token. If
Right.
I have a piece of middleware that says, hey, go get this token. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This makes sense to me.
Casey, any thoughts?
I was almost thinking of this sort of in the opposite order, and maybe looking at the flow diagram more closely will point out something that I was thinking wrong. But I was almost thinking that hyper63 keeps track of the secret. Like the API, basically you wouldn't have anything to do with generating a secret and then sending a public key to hyper63. It'd almost be sort of the opposite.
Yeah, so if still the API has to have something to identify itself and register itself. So that's kind of this flow, this post token. Then if hyper63 kind of keeps the secret and creates JWTs, then the API has to have something that it protects that hyper trust, right? So if you wanted to do that, then you're a better approach would be to use something like Express Gateway and put this gateway kind of in front of hyper63 and manage it that way. Or a Kong or a Mule or Apogee. You would, and again, one of the reasons is that it's like if hyper63 has an opinion about that part of the authentication, then it's going to be, it's not going to be able to be used in an open source context and a multi-tenant service context without having, really some weird abstractions that make it a challenge.
Okay.
So that's really the main problem of going to some sort of proprietary solution like that instead of using kind of a standard solution.
All right.
Unless there's something I'm missing.
I mean, I sort of had the same intuition as Casey when I first looked at the diagram, that like Hyper had the private and then it issued like a public key to like consumers. And I can see kind of both. But the with the currently proposed solution and the API kind of deciding its identity provider, its like authorization server, it's appealing to me just because I know a lot of companies will already have like an authorization server, like Auth0 or something, and they just want to keep using that and not have to worry about other kinds of tokens. And so they just use Auth0 as their identity provider and authorization server, and then just post those tokens into hyper63. And hyper63 just sort of adopts their authentication strategy, or their authorization strategy, sorry. That part sounds cool to me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just struggle to see with this one, what is the secret sauce that allows this API to get a token? Is it, an API key, right? And then if someone else gets that API key, then anybody can call to get that token, and they've hijacked the system. So, unless we use a service gateway, which really moves from an open source solution into more of a software as a service solution. And what our goal is to be able to have both, have an open source solution, but then Hyper 63.llc has also a software as a service solution as well. But the authentication models will be different. Any thoughts, Robert?
I'm gonna let it sit for a bit. I don't know enough about operating services with public-private keys to be able to speak
Yeah, well,
to all that.
a good example is GitHub, right? So GitHub, everyone has their private key, and GitHub shows the world your public key, right? So you can go to GitHub and get your public key for your account, and anybody else can. But the only way they could get access to your account and repositories is to actually go on your machine and get your private key.
Right. I've got GPG signing on every commit as well. So yeah.
But
Yeah,
the nice
yeah.
thing about that is the auth service, right? Anyone can log into the auth service and delete those private keys, and then all of a sudden no one can get access to hyper63. Right. So it gives auditors and security folks that level of control.
Yeah. The token stuff, like this flow makes sense to me. I don't like the extra bit of work you got to do, but to go back and do that, validating every time for every. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an opinion right now, but
Okay.
I'm sure I usually do. So give it some time.
Well, give it some thought. Regardless of this, I think however that shakes out, the thing is probably the next RFC. Just really quick is to really make the client kind of hide those details anyway. So that way, when you're an API developer and you're building your API and you're connecting to your service, whatever we tell you to put in is what you have to put in, and then you're gonna get access to it. So we can hide those details from the user, the API developer. The last RFC to talk about, if you have time, is well, they're kind of two. One is on the client, kind of start to take these primitives and compose them into pipelines. So for example, if I know that I want to cache the document movie, then I could just use my client and say, set up DB, and here are my document types. I've got movie, I've got actor, I've got producer. Go ahead and cache movie and go ahead and cache actor. And then what the client would do is basically run a pipeline. So anytime you add a movie, it will also add it to the cache. And then anytime you get the movie, it'll get it from the cache first. If it's not in the cache, then it'll go to the database. We could do the same thing for search too. You could just say, for name movie, do search true. And it would do the same. It would basically compose the data port and the search port. And then every time something's added to data or updated from data, it would just also in that pipeline add it to search or update it in search. And then when you did a search, you would just have your documents there. Any thoughts about that idea?
As an API, I love it. It's really like simple, like as a consumer, just being able to like set a key. Is the idea that like when instantiating the client or something like that. So is the idea that the client would actually make two separate calls to hyper63 underneath the hood?
No. Well, yeah, the client would make two separate calls to Hyper if you're composing the primitives, right? It would make a call to the data port and a call to the search port. Yes.
Okay. So a couple questions. What happens if I go to persist something, it works, or it's successful, then I tried to cache it, and for whatever reason that fails?
Right. So it would, you know, again, have to map it out, but my feeling is that it would, you know, once it's saved to the source of truth, then it's going to return a success. It may return a success with a message could not cache, check your cache server, but it would return a success to the client.
So if it returns a message that cache wasn't successful or something, would that mean that the caching, it would have to wait for the caching operation to complete, and thereby the caching would be blocking? Or do we want it to be some sort of like event that gets emitted out of the client that you can listen
Yeah.
to or something like that?
Yeah, the way that that I would set it up is I would set up a, you know, kind of an event, um, kind of internal event emitter, so that, you know, it would be um, yeah. I guess we have to think through that,
Okay.
figure that out.
Yeah, I don't know if there's like client.db.subscribe or something like that, and you like
Yeah.
subscribe to events, and maybe you can set up your retry logic, or I don't know, something, whatever the use cases are. But it would be nice if these sort of ancillary actions that sort of happen, like in this case on DB, like when I persist a movie, I don't want the cache to like block. I just want to persist and then get my response back, and then in the
Right.
background, like set up the caching.
Yep.
Or maybe that's
Yeah,
configurable.
and you know, again, this won't prevent you from manually setting it up, right? So maybe this is, you know, this is an opinionated use case if you want to set something up quick, and then if this particular opinionated case doesn't work for you, then you don't include cache and you implement it the way that you want to implement it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Very good point. I think the API looks really nice from a consumer perspective.
Well,
Is someone else about to say something?
That was me. Yeah. So like you said cache and search. Um, my brain is not working. What are other examples of these like Boolean flags that you put in here?
so search, so you just say search true, and then you know, basically it would every time you create a new movie document, it would also add it to the search index. But those are the two main ones. Another one could be like if you're setting up storage, you know, you might want to upload a file and upload metadata. Um, and you might want to compose those two, like an avatar for a user account or something like that.
Okay, thanks.
Um, the last one, just to, you know, go through all these, is the schema, kind of like a mongoose, if you're familiar with mongoose, or SQLize, where in your client you go through and basically, you know, basically add a schema as you're setting up your document types. And then that schema just has to follow some sort of pattern. Probably model it after Zod or something. It would be nice to model it after an either, right? Or a validation result. So, you know, anything that can generate a validation result type, it would work. But anyway, either way, the gist of it is that as I'm building these types, I can give it a schema, and then the client would actually essentially do a validation step before it actually persisted anything. My concern with this is people might not do a validation step at the front of their API before they do their business logic. So the one thing that I would say is, you know, you need to put your schema somewhere where you put your business logic, so you can use that schema both as you validate before you run your business rules, and you can validate after. Any thoughts about that one?
So my first thought on this, and it kind of ties into a question I had on the last discussion or the last RFC, was like the plugin system that we've built for hyper63 allows for like plugin composition to build an adapter for a given port. Is there, like, all this would be happening within the client? Have you given any thought into also having this as part of plugins that you compose into adapters as part of the hyper63 instance? So it's like basically done like server side as opposed to client side, if you will.
Right. So the adapters are supposed to be general and not specific. So I'd have to give some thought to that. How do you keep them generic and, you know, again, keep, you know, keep the API team focused on solving business problems, and not in, you know, kind of infrastructure, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, I yeah, it definitely should be given some more thought, because we don't want to encourage people to do. We're trying to encourage them to keep their business logic all in one place, not sort of spread it around. But I like thinking, I don't know, some sort of like validation plugin, and you could like validate over this particular, like you could compose a validation plugin, and it's just a very generic, like pass it a schema, and then you can compose it on top of create document for a data port, for example. And then it would add that validation. And if it passes validation, then it calls the next piece of in the plugin chain to persist it. I don't know. It definitely has to be given more thought, but both for this one and the last one, I was thinking, well, the plugin system would definitely allow for this to be done server side. I wonder if we might.
Yeah, but it's just bypassing core, and core has your hooks and your scopes, and I don't know. It just mitigates, you know, the purpose of the data adapter is really well defined. If you, I mean, certainly you could add a plugin, but I think it kind of breaks its mission a little bit.
Perhaps I'm misunderstanding the use case here then.
Yeah, the use case here is really like twofold. One is to have a second line of defense before you throw your data to hyper63. The other is that you could imagine some sort of admin UI where or an admin tool where someone's kind of building these schemas and they generate the validation into code for the API team to use. So think of a CMS portal, right? Where you go in and you specify your models. And then when developers use those endpoints, those models validate those endpoints.
Okay. I think I just need to think about it a little bit more.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from anyone?
No, kind of what you were saying. We talking about having, so you got like a compositional pipeline of like, I guess procedurally, like step one, something, step two, like do something with a request or structure of data, and then step two, validate that, and then like if everything's fine, just return whatever that data was and carry on to the next step.
Yeah. So the
So,
plugins.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Good. No, I was just saying I've for like I guess 3 years now had that on an app at work, for better or worse. But the biggest problem is that people forget to include it in these pipelines. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea. I like the because I love the concept. That's how my brain works. And so with the it is what it is that does that conflict with how Tom is suggesting it be set up? By just when you're setting up the DB, you pass the schema. Are you saying you would want it not in this DB setup, but in some other pipeline? I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thought process was the schema and like the validation could kind of live within like that pipeline that's used as part of the plugins that Tom was just showing. Yeah. You can see for each port, the
right.
plugins is an array, and a plugin can implement a partial of the port API. And then as long as those plugins, when they're composed together, form the entire port implementation, then that's what you have. So basically you kind of compose a adapter out of plugins. An adapter is just a special plugin that implements all the methods for a given port.
My biggest challenge with this is that this is injecting business logic in your general surface area. And
yeah.
And it's the same thing as defining tables in a SQL database. Now you've got two places you have to maintain those things. But I mean
no, that makes that I totally grok that, Tom. I agree. That's a bad idea, and we want to be discouraging developers from doing that. I think I'm misunderstanding what we meant by sort of like the validation that we were meaning to enforce.
Yeah. So
like data shape versus like the shape of the data versus like the semantic meaning of the data, or
yeah. So to try to roll back the genesis of this request, number one is as I'm implementing 2 projects using Hyper and building 2 different APIs, I'm noticing that I'm using a similar pattern where I'm validating, then doing my business rules, and then sending it to Hyper. And this kind of was derived from the thing of, what if I have a backstop that validates the schema on the client, um, so that, again, I make sure before I send to the client that my data is right. And then the other side was someone proposed building a portal so that they could data model for hyper63. And this was kind of the melding of those 2 ideas.
I get this now. Yeah, because it's like saying I don't really care about injecting this as like we at work use that concept Tyler was talking about as middleware with Koa. Like it's just a middleware in a chain of
Right.
God knows how many middleware. Um,
Right.
but this is more like, hey, I want to have this thing called movies or movie, and here's what that looks like. And so whenever you're doing stuff, I just want you to take what I said a movie is, and I want you to make sure that the movie is okay. Is that what you're getting at? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, another piece that people don't necessarily do is when they get a movie from a service, a trusted or non-trusted service, they don't necessarily validate that before they send it to the client. Whereas with this, you would make sure every time you got a movie or got a list of movies, the client would essentially validate that based on your schema before bubbling it up to your business logic and to your client. So it
What
just,
would happen in a go ahead.
it just like I said, there's twofold. One is just to reduce some additional code, maybe even make the client have a validation function, and then the other is to potentially build a data modeling tool that could help teams build their API and maintain their API. And you're right, you would normally, like in Koa or Express, maybe use the middleware, but if you use the middleware for that, like if we use Express, then if someone wanted to use Restify, right, that middleware may not work for that, right? Or if someone wanted to use, GPRC and a gateway there, or if someone wanted just to embed, kind of Hyper in their project. So those were kind of the knocks for not using middleware.
Yeah. No, I dig it. If what's the I have to run, go do dad stuff in a second.
Yeah,
But
sorry, I'm running over.
it's okay. Yeah. What about like what does the failure case look like? So like let's say the data coming back, it does not match this. What happens next in the flow?
Right. I'll take that as homework. And
Yeah. So I'm like this, like I dig it, but then how do you recover from that? And like, because if you're trying to make sure that what's coming back from Hyper back to the client is exactly what they actually want without them having to do that extra check step,
Right.
then what do you do?
Yeah,
Is there
no,
some
it's a good
on
point.
error? Is there
Yeah, I
some
mean,
when you
like
set up the
what
DA?
I'm doing now is just saying, uh, that that format is undefined or whatever, something like that, unspecified. But it, yeah, if you change the shape of the movie and change the validation and you don't migrate your old movie shapes to new movie shapes, this would catch that and it would need to give you a clear message.
Yeah, an idea that pops to mind. We are talking about firing off events and having listeners for that. Anytime I've done anything like this, set up some sort of whether you use that on interface or just have some single callback that gets called like on error, and then you send through essentially a type and message or type and payload, and then that would let it not fail silently and not fail loudly. It's more like, hey, something ain't right. We've tried and caught this, and here you go. If you do what you want to do with an error, you want to bring the system down, fine. If you want to log it, then do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just some thoughts.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, that's all I had. Was there anybody that had any other new business? Sorry, we went long today.
Can you share those off diagrams in the Slack? Because it'll be a lot easier to talk about something after looking at those for a while than improvise. Also, this is sort of a general question, but I think I may have been expecting more management on Hyper's side for this than you actually want to do. You might, I won't go down this rabbit hole right now. You just send those and then I'll bring it up next time if there's time, or in Slack or something.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, yeah. Again, just I don't want to create an open source project that is unusable, right? Like that you have to use the service to use it. So that's a goal.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Go.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys later.
Yeah.